The lead up to the federal budget is an avalanche of numbers. 40 million for this program, 8 billion here, 19 million there, huge amounts of money. But what comes of the initiatives that they fund? A new report out today says the vast majority of federal government programs over the past decade had not been properly evaluated. So we don't know if they're working, failing, or how to make them better. We don't know if we're getting value for money. Melinda Cilento is the Chief Executive of CEDA. That's the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. And Melinda joins us now. Welcome.
Good morning.
When a program is commissioned by the federal government, is there an evaluation structure that's put in place as part of that?
Well, I think as your opening comment summarised pretty well, actually, what our research found was that's not the case. You know, we looked at over 100 federal, state and territory spending programs across a whole range of policy areas and found that 95% of them were not properly evaluated. And as you said, that means that we just really don't know whether they're working or not. We're not getting the evidence about what is working and what the impact is on the people they're supposed to be supporting and assisting.
A lot of funding goes into community services, disability, aged care, social supports, child protection. You estimate at least $61 billion of this spending is unlikely to be properly evaluated. So can you just be specific about what kind of programs these are? Are these built into the system that just continue to, roll out, or are they one-offs? What sorts of complexity or diversity was in what you analysed?
We were looking at the major spending programs. So these are big programs, and if you work on the number that 95% of programs are not being properly evaluated, then that means that, as you said, upwards of $60 billion that's meant to be spent improving people's daily lives, we don't know whether that is or not. And so we don't know whether people's lives are being made better. We don't know whether they're being adversely impacted, by some of the programs. And we're not learning from that. So what we have to do is look at the aggregate outcomes. We looked at this through the lens of disadvantage. And if you look at it through that lens, we know that we're not doing enough to address poverty. We know there's these areas of really entrenched disadvantage that we've been spending a lot on for years, and we're really not moving the dial at all.
So you're saying we are spending a lot on disadvantage, but we're just not getting outcomes from that?
That's right. And I think, one, we're not getting the outcomes that we want. I think it means for taxpayers, they're looking at money being spent and wondering why we're not seeing changes in these outcomes. And I think that part of the problem with that is that, the community is looking at saying, well, can we, is this just impossible to address? Or we're starting to look at recipients and say, well, is this something that's on your end and it doesn't have to do with the program? So we really need to build an evaluation culture. We need to make sure that we're looking at how the programs are being designed and delivered. Are they working? What does work, and how can we do more of that? And if it's not working, how can we change it? And not necessarily at the end of a program, but as we're working to implement a program, what can we learn on the way through that can help us to make some changes on the way through to see better outcomes? You've
called for an evaluator general to be appointed by the government. Explain to me what that is.
Well, this is something that the government is looking like it's going to introduce. We think it's an important part of the evaluation process, but not the silver bullet. So having an Office of the Evaluator General, which is sending a clear signal about the importance of evaluation, that's championing evaluation and building capabilities and capacity across the public sector, a really important thing to do. They can identify where there are problems with the data that's available. They can keep all the evaluations so others can learn from that, but we don't think they should be doing the evaluations themselves.
I want to move to another issue, but, it's not unrelated. The government is under increasing pressure to lift the rate of job seeker in the budget. Research has shown the income supports introduced during COVID dramatically reduced poverty. What are the repercussions if the government decides not to increase the rate?
Well, we've been supporting an increase in the job seeker rate, as have many, for a long time now. And that reflects the fact that it's just it's just completely inadequate. Its proportion of minimum wages and things like that has just been falling and falling, and these people are living in really dire circumstances. And really, we need to see a lift in that job seeker rate if we want people to be able to actually participate in our economy and participate in the community. We saw during COVID that when we lifted payments to job seekers, their lives improved. They were able to stabilise their circumstances. And there are some real positive benefits, including for the broader budget settings, because they were making fewer trips to the emergency department and things like that. So I think it's really important. One, we're a country where we shouldn't see the proportion of people that we do living in poverty. Lifting the job seeker payment is the most direct and best way to improve their lives.
This is coming at the same time for calls for the single parents payment to also be increased, so that it's essentially all the eligibility for it to change. I should reframe that, not forcing single parents to go onto the unemployment benefit when their youngest child turns 8. So how can the government realistically do both, or do you think they can?
Patricia, I think the simple answer is that we should be able to afford a social safety net that doesn't consign people to live in poverty. And if we haven't got budget settings that enable that, I think there's a broader issue here that we need to seriously address. From our perspective, when we look back at what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, we have to start reviewing spending so that it's more efficient and effective. We are going to have to build momentum to deliver a more effective and efficient tax base. There's some really broad drivers around fiscal policy that we're going to have to look at, but not doing things when people are living in poverty, I don't think that's where we should be looking.
If the government doesn't increase the job seeker rate in the May budget, how big a blunder would you see that as, given there's obviously enormous pressure on them right now?
There is enormous pressure, and I have to say that it reflects the fact that people have been calling for this, and we've been calling for this, as have many others, for such a long period of time. This has been a known challenge for a long time, and I think we just have to actually get it done. I do think that if we don't see a significant lift in the job seeker rate, what we all have to accept is that we are allowing people to live in poverty when we know what will help them lift out of those circumstances in a way which the Economic Inclusion Committee is actually saying will increase their likelihood of being able to participate in our economy and participate in our community more broadly.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Melinda Cilento is the Chief Executive of CEDA, and you're listening to ABC RN Breakfast.